What's up, everybody? I'm Josh Meek, the Uber Geek. Welcome to This Week in Magic for Sunday, March 11th. This Week in Magic is a new weekly video series coming from Pretty Dees that will focus on all of the news and happenings in the world of Magic the Gathering over the course of the past 7 days. We're going to do deep dives on all the news stories in Magic, and we're going to assume you have a little bit of knowledge about Magic the Gathering. So unlike the normal Pretty Dees videos, we're going to go very, very deep into the one subject of Magic the Gathering. And the first thing on the news docket for Magic this week is the leak of some of the cards and the mechanics and a bit of the story from the upcoming set Dominaria. This set won't be released until the end of April, but a Chinese language release notes document did leak out into the wild. And it included tons of stuff. We found out the mechanics that are going to be in the set, some of the general themes that are happening in the set, some of the rule changes and cosmetic changes to the cards. And we got a large portion of the cards in text version. So not actual card art, but the actual kind of written out text and power and toughness and CMC of the cards themselves. So we have, a big chunk of the set just sort of dropped into our laps here in Chinese. So a lot of players started working to translate these cards and figure out exactly what was going on in this set. And then Wizards responded themselves, and to their credit, they were very quick with responding to this leak. They put up a news story, and they released all the translated versions of the release notes, so any language that you want to see these notes in, you can go download. So you can download the full English version of the release notes. And that's actually something that I suggest you doing if you are interested in this at all. It's very, very cool to dig through that stuff, and it's neat to see the text versions of these cards before we actually get to see the cards themselves. So, along with releasing these release notes in all the translated versions, Wizards kind of laid out a revised version of their preview plans. Obviously, this leaking out early destroyed a lot of the plans they had for slowly trickling out card images and telling you about the set in a controlled way. So now that's going to be changing. So starting on Monday, we're going to get some articles about the mechanics of the set and about the rule changes, and then that'll continue through the week. So from there, they're going to try to essentially recover this release preview cycle, but it is going to happen at a slightly different pace than we otherwise would have seen. Now, even though we do know a lot about Dominaria, there's some things that we don't know yet about the set. First of all, we don't know any of the cards' art, except for one preview card that we have, which we'll take a look at here in a second. So, despite the fact we know all the text, we don't know what the new frames look like for legendary creatures. We do know they're changing. And we don't know what, Sagas look like, and we don't know what any of the awesome art for this set looks like. So, if you're like me, art is a huge part of playing the Magic the Gathering. So that is something that you can still kind of hotly anticipate as we get to see the cards finally instead of just read them. We also know nothing about a, quote, fun new way to play Magic. That is mentioned in the article that got put up about this leak. And apparently they'd already planned to talk about it, but now they can talk about this new way to play Magic using Dominaria cards as examples. No one has any idea what this means. There's lots of speculation going around. We do know that Dominaria is going to have a legendary creature per pack. So some people have speculated that it is some way to do, sealed commander games where you have to use one of the legendary cards that you pull out of the packs. But honestly, this could be anything, and it's very exciting because variants on the game of Magic are a blast to play, and I'm always very anxious to try them out. So Wizards has something up their sleeve that we'll find out about soon enough there. We also don't know some 122-ish cards that are in the set. The release notes that were leaked out contained information about a ton of the cards in the set, but only the cards that required kind of further explanation, clarification, or further discussion. So there are over 100 cards left in the set that we haven't seen that didn't need to be included in release notes, but this could be any type of card. Mark Rosewater, the head designer of Magic, says that there are some big cards left that we haven't seen that they can still preview in their normal manner, and that haven't been spoiled thus far in the release notes leak. So even though we've seen a big chunk of the set, the excitement's not over. There's still a lot left to come. So you can dive into the set right now. Scryfall put up a really, really well done visual spoiler. So you can actually see the cards themselves in the correct color and everything like that. You just can't see the art. So it's a really easy way to kind of flip through the cards visually. And, once the actual art version of the card is released, those will get replaced. But for right now, it's a really nice way to have those cards included in your normal Scryfall searches. So let's take a look at the one card that actually has been fully spoiled so far, and that is Hammerhead Explorer. He's right over there. You can see him in all of his giant lobster person terrifying glory. And, it's been a long time since they've been released, so you might not know this. Magic has other Hammerhead creatures as well. Not a lot, but a few, and they're all kind of equally terrifying and equally as low impact as Hammerhead Explorer here. For example, there's the card Hammerhead. There's Hammerhead right there. I mean, look at that guy. Again, look at his terrifying alien face. And tell me that the artist that drew this knew anything about what a lobster looked like. It certainly is not apparent by looking at the card art. We, of course, have Hammerhead Warrior as well, a classic Hammerhead-based card. And this is my favorite art, by the way, for Hammerhead Warrior. He has some really great ones. This one is hilarious because his claws are on backwards, right? It's very clear. Those claws are not on correct. Also, where did he get the shell? And more importantly, how did he tie that shell on? It doesn't make any sense. I have no idea. So Hammerheads have a long history there in Magic of being real head scratchers of creatures. And this one actually looks like, kind of a not too bad limited card. It's, again, a very low impact card. Just an uncommon from the set. But the cool thing about Hammerhead here is that we get to see one of the new features of the set, which is the cool little dividing line that shows up between the rules text of the cards and the flavor text of the cards. So nice little dividing thing. It's a very minor thing, but it looks really nice in practice. So there we are, Hammerhead Explorer in the set. And while he is a little bit kind of unexciting, there are a lot of really exciting cards in this set, so I would tell you to go check it out, go check out that visual spoiler, and see what's out there. I'm not going to dive into individual cards from here, but there is a lot to be excited about and a lot of returning characters if you have followed the Magic lore for any amount of time. So go check it out for yourselves. One of the things that I do want to jump into, however, are the mechanics of the set, because the actual mechanics, how to play the game, that is one of the most exciting parts about Magic. So let's dive into the mechanics that are going to show up in Dominaria as described in this release notes document. First up are new Saga cards. And Saga cards are a new subtype of enchantment. And lore-wise, they tell the story of key events that unfold throughout your turns. So in actual practice, that means that Sagas get what are called lore counters. They get their first lore counter when they enter the battlefield, and then they get subsequent lore counters right after your draw step on each of your turns. They have these chapter abilities, which are triggered abilities that trigger when that many lore counters are put on the Saga. So, for example, the Chapter 2 chapter ability triggers after your draw step on the turn after you play the Saga, when you add the second lore counter to the Saga. Of course, if you have any shenanigans for modifying or changing counters, that all works here with the Sagas. So for example, if you proliferate counters and you add one more counter to your Saga, that triggered ability, that chapter ability will happen at that time. It doesn't wait until the beginning of your turn. You can also remove lore counters, so the chapter abilities only trigger when you add counters, not when you remove them, but you can remove counters and have the chapter abilities re-trigger as you add more lore counters on. Otherwise, the Sagas are sacrificed after it has as many lore counters as it has chapter abilities. So all of the ones here in Dominaria have 3 chapter abilities. When you add the third lore counter, you activate that chapter ability, it happens, and then you sacrifice that Saga enchantment. So without any other shenanigans going on, they are around for 3 of your turns. They have 3 different effects on them. Now, these Saga cards feel kind of to me like a simplified version of the contraption cranking concept from Unstable. Obviously, they're very different than that, but it's the same as kind of you're doing something now that will play out in future turns, and you're kind of investing in the future of your deck and of your creatures and of what's going on your battlefield. You're saying that, okay, in 2 turns, in 3 turns here, I want something cool to happen, but I won't get it right now. Obviously, with contraptions, the cycle keeps happening, and with Sagas, you sacrifice them after they're all done. And of course, you do get something right away with Sagas because they get their first lore counter after they come into the battlefield. And contraptions, you have to wait until your next turn. But I think that there is some kind of through line there with at least the idea of how they work. So that's at least what they put me in the mind of. Without actually playing with any of the Sagas, I'm not sure if they'll be, super effective and constructed or anything like that. But they're certainly interesting and fine additions to the Magic format. One of the other things that's happening in the set is Legendary is a big theme. Legendary permanents and even Legendary sorceries. We'll talk about that in a second. But as I mentioned, at least one Legendary creature will be in each pack. And we are seeing a modified card frame with additional flourishes to differentiate a legendary creature from a non-legendary creature. And we'll see tons of these in this set, and lots of them are really, really cool. So Commander players are rejoicing right now for all the plethora of options they're going to have for Commanders after Dominaria releases. Now, I mentioned legendary sorceries, and that's one of the big mechanic updates for this set. Sorceries can now have the super type legendary. And what that means with a sorcery, unlike a permanent, it means that you can only cast these sorceries when you control a legendary creature or planeswalker. Otherwise, you literally can't cast these cards. And this is checked when you cast. So if you cast the card and someone destroys your only legendary creature, the spell will still resolve as normal. Otherwise, these are mechanically the exact same as any other sorcery. It's just that extra little check there to make sure you have a legendary creature or planeswalker. Now, to me, this feels a little bit weird. Obviously, it's a pretty low impact change. It's very easy to understand. But it is functionally very different from what legendary means on a permanent. And I feel like it could lead to some confusion for new players when they see this word being tossed around all over the place, and it means different things in different contexts. So I'm not sure what the better way to handle that would have been, but I maybe would have preferred just a keyword that indicates that you could only cast it when you control a legendary creature, instead of adding that legendary super type to the sorceries themselves. But I do really enjoy them forcing you to be invested in their legendary theme to get the payoff of what are these kind of big legendary sorcery effects. So, in actual practice and actual gameplay, I really like the direction that this is pushing you down. Now, the next sort of new mechanic in the set is basically just a game term, and that is Historic. Historic is any card that has the legendary super type, the artifact type, or is a Saga enchantment. So an enchantment with the Saga subtype. And in its own right, a historic card doesn't do anything just for being a historic card, but some other cards will have abilities that trigger, for example, when you cast a historic spell. So essentially, that's just a shorthand for saying when you cast a legendary card, an artifact card, or a Saga enchantment. Functionally, this really doesn't change anything for how the game plays. It is just a shorthand, but for me it feels very strange because it's tying together a super type in Legendary, a regular type in Artifact, and a subtype in Saga, so a very specific type of enchantment. It makes sense in the set of Dominaria because it gives you a payoff for playing within the themes of the set as they are laid out. But when you take a card that references the historic cards, kind of out of context, out of the Dominaria set, it seems a little strange that we're just zeroing in on these three very disparate types of cards. But that's just, again, a general sort of shorthand game term called historic. Now, Kicker, which is another mechanic, is actually returning to the set. So we have seen Kicker before. Kicker is back. Kicker, of course, just lets you pay a little bit more for your spells, and then they get to do a little bit more. So, for example, a card might have a kicker that lets you draw a card if you paid the kicker price. Or a creature might have a kicker that if you kicked it, it comes into the battlefield with some extra +1/+1 counters. So again, pretty easy to understand mechanic, but is a really fun one to play around with, and it lets your cards kind of have effects in the late game that you might not have in the early game. So once you have the extra mana where you can kick things, they get to come in and do a little bit extra as you play them, which is a really cool, really fun thing. So moving on from there, those are the general mechanics. We also have some rules changes coming in Dominaria, and the big one is that damage can no longer be redirected to Planeswalkers. And this is a very welcome change in my mind. As it was before, was very clunky. So now they're basically going back and doing some of the work to errata over 700 different cards to make it very clear who these damage-dealing cards can target. So previously, because they added Planeswalkers after the fact, you had this redirection going on. So for example, I cast Lightning Bolt, it says to target player, you see if it resolves, and then, you say, okay, I'm redirecting to your Planeswalker instead of to you. And that was weird, and it felt a little tacked on. Now these cards are actually getting changed. So for example, any of these damage-dealing cards that previously had said target creature or player will now say any target. So any target being creature, player, or Planeswalker. Similarly, target player or Planeswalker is the new wording for target player. So if a card could only damage a player, the new wording is target player or Planeswalker. Now, finally, any abilities that deal damage but don't specifically call for a target aren't being changed except for one small exception, but in general, those cards are remaining unchanged. Now, obviously, errata on cards is something that Wizards tries to avoid, but I think in this case, it is a good change. I think it simplifies the rules of the game. And it does make looking at your old printed cards maybe a little confusing if you don't know which ones have been errated and which ones haven't. But I think they've made the rules for what they changed here pretty simple to remember. So it's a little bit to keep in mind if you have the old printed versions of the cards. But again, I think it adds a lot to the game. I think it makes the game very smooth to play overall. So this is a much needed change as it stands. Dominaria also comes with some other very minor changes in the set, just a couple of them to highlight. Cards no longer refer to your mana pool. So the mana pool still exists in the rules, but cards themselves won't refer to it because, again, it just adds to confusion. So you won't be seeing the term mana pool on cards in the future. And finally, cards will now use they instead of he or she when they're talking about a specific player. Now, not only is this a much smoother reading sentence on most cards, it also is a bit more inclusionary, which is always great with a game like Magic that's played by so many different people. So that is a very minor but a very cool change that's happening for Magic. Now, there was some news this week that was related to more than just the leak of Dominaria. Of course, this year is Magic's 25th anniversary, and Magic is having some birthday celebrations throughout the year to kind of celebrate with all of you about the success and length of Magic the Gathering. These birthday celebrations will happen at 5 different Grand Prix through June and July, and will culminate at Gen Con in August. And the big, huge thing happening at these birthday celebrations are the opportunity to play in beta and unlimited Rochester drafts. Yes, those are drafts that involve beta and unlimited cards, which is ridiculous. Obviously, there are literally thousands of dollars worth of cards there on the line in one of those drafts. So it would be an actual joy to play in any of those. Now, to get in one of those highly sought after drafts, you need to win a sealed qualifying tournament to get an invitation to those drafts. And there's going to be 8 sealed tournaments per event. So at any given event that you go to, you will have some opportunity there to get into those, but the competition is going to be very stiff, as everyone vies, to have kind of a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to get to draft Beta and Unlimited once again. So, huge, just pulling out all the stops for their birthday celebration there. So, really exciting, really awesome. Happy birthday to Magic the Gathering. So that's going to do it for this week in Magic for this week. Thank you very much for joining me. If you liked this video, check out some of the other videos that Pretty Dees puts out every single day about just general entertainment and pop culture. Otherwise, come back next week for another This Week in Magic to figure out what the heck happened in Magic the Gathering over the course of the week. Make sure that you like Pretty Dees on Facebook at facebook.com/PrettyDeesShow. Follow me on Twitter at PrettyDeesShow and visit PrettyDeesShow.com. Subscribe to the channel, subscribe to the podcast, and I'll see you next week. Peace.